hearty welcome, Peter Shah and Dr. Luke.
Thank you.
And my
so
dear,
very,
yeah,
yes,
and my dear participants, I know that you all are, we all have the passion for teaching. That is why we are here. That's the only reason why we are here. So the next 1 hour, nearly 1 hour, will be a point where we will nurture that passion. We will have a rich experience sharing from Peter Shah as well as Dr. Lee. And almost everyone is very familiar for us, and everyone is almost in the from the academic community itself, and some of the present students have also joined. I believe that they have so passion for the teaching. That may be the reason why one or two students might have also joined with us. So once again, I welcome each and every participants who have that passion for teaching for this program. Once again, I welcome our resource person and handing over the mic to Peter Shah and Dr. B. Over to you.
Thank you, Dean. I want to emphasize how appreciative and honored we are to be invited to speak to the faculty and staff at St. Albert's and any guests. This sort of work is tremendously pleasurable for us to talk with colleagues. In fact, it's one of the best parts of our job is when we have conversations with our colleagues, and the opportunity to talk about what we do and to help increase people's awareness of some of the amazing resources to improve teaching and learning that we have now available. So I'm going to jump into my slides a bit. So I present your entire screen. Cancel. I'm going to try that one more time. It's entire screen, and then I'm going to go share, and I'm going to jump over to the presentation and present. So sorry, I should have begun at the very beginning. So my apologies. This is what happens when you're looking over your presentation beforehand. So there we go. Present. All right, there we go. Learning design for higher education. Again, a quick introduction to who we are. I'm Peter Shea. I'm a learning designer who directs professional development at Middlesex Community College of Massachusetts, which is an open access college in the United States, with transfer to state institutions like the UMass Lowell and UMass Amherst. And I also teach co-teach adult learning at Harvard Extension School. My esteemed colleague, Dr. Luke Hobson, is a program manager and learning designer at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a fairly prolific podcaster on learning design. So we'll talk a little bit more of that later. So like any good designers, we like to inform our audience what are the intended outcomes of our presentation. So in this brief hour, we're going to talk about what learning design is and why it's important, how it can inform the best practices in higher education, and how learning designers typically assist faculty to build online courses that do much more than replicate the face-to-face classroom. Although I would also add that learning designers also work with faculty for their face-to-face courses. So what is learning design? Learning design is sometimes, and perhaps more commonly, referred to as instructional design. One of the points of humor in our profession is that there are so many terms for what we do. Learning designer, learning architect, learning engineer, instructional designer, curriculum designer, curriculum developer. And these are really kind of overlapping terms for the same basic field, which is concerned with applying learning theory and learning research to actual formal learning experiences. So one of the best ones, one of the more concise ones, is that it's the application of a pedagogical or andragogical model for a specific learning objective, target group, and specific context. So what we do is we not only try to look at what are best practices, but what are the best practices for what types of learning, types of learner, and in what kind of learning environment. So we take everything into consideration. And so one of some of the key concepts in learning design, first of all, understanding the learner's needs, focusing on outcomes and objectives, the environment, and theories of learning that underscores the instructional methods. So I'm going to do the first part of the presentation where I talk a little bit about the background of the field of learning design. And then my colleague Luke is going to talk about how he helps specifically apply it when he works with faculty at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So one question is, well, why is this important? Why do we even have a field like learning design? We have teachers, we have instructors. What's the need of this additional field for? Well, it basically comes down to this. Over the past 100 years, there has been a tremendous amount of research into what makes for effective instruction and learning. This is sometimes called learning science. But many people in higher education, many faculty, have been trained primarily to be subject matter experts and scholars, not as specialists in human learning. So learning designers or instructional designers are trained in applied learning science and theory, and they often work to fill in the gaps that faculty have about what does the research says that really helps students learn. There was a very influential article written 50 years ago by the esteemed scholar at Carnegie Mellon University called Herb Simon, who was a Nobel Prize winner. And he was contributor to a number of different fields: political science, cognitive psychology, artificial intelligence, decision theory, computer science. And in his article, he made the observation, this was written in the late 1960s, that higher education teaching is a very strange profession. In every other field, people are formally trained in the best practices. If you're a doctor, you're trained how to apply medicine in the most efficient way. If you're a lawyer, you're trained to apply research to what you do. If you're an engineer, you do. But higher education faculty are taught to be subject matter experts. But there's traditionally very little emphasis on teaching methodologies beyond the lecture method. And that led Simon to say that higher education in his time was basically dominated by what he called talented amateurism. There were passionate people doing it, but they had never really been trained professionally to be educational specialists. And he saw this as a very significant problem. So earlier I referred to andragogy and pedagogy. Now, in my experience, many faculty are familiar with the word pedagogy or pedagogical, but andragogy is often a curious phrase, and so I need to explain it. Andragogy is based upon the theory that there's a difference between the way human beings learn when they are young and the way they learn when they are older. Children are often just very curiosity-driven in their learning, whereas by adolescence and adulthood, learners are motivated by need to know. They don't want to know for the sake of knowing necessarily. They want to know, they want to acquire knowledge that they can apply in the world. They want to learn experientially through, by doing things rather than simply listening to a presentation or a lecture. They're much more oriented around problem solving, and they learn best when the topic is of immediate value. In other words, they can apply it very quickly to situations in their life. So what would be an example of applied learning science? Well, one element we've learned from research around the brain is what we call spaced learning practice, which is an approach to learning based upon research into how human beings remember things. Now, I'm sure you know that many students, when it comes to preparing for an exam or a project, cram. They'll spend hours and hours and hours and hours under the mistaken belief that will improve their performance. But research says that doesn't work at all. In fact, it's counterproductive. What they really need to do is study intensely for a brief period of time and then stop and do something else and give the brain time to absorb it, and then come back and study again. Break that time, do something else, come back, study intensely again. Rather like building a muscle. You can't build muscles by constantly lifting weights. You have to lift weights and then give time for the muscles to develop, and then you return to the exercise work. So in a sense, there's an analogy with the brain, but a lot of students don't know this, and a lot of faculty don't know this because this was the method they used themselves when they were students. So what we have found is that a lot of teaching in higher education is governed by practices which the instructors learned when they were students. And they may or may not be aware that those practices are not validated by research. Another example would be underlining things in a book. Underlining by itself has limited value. But if you underline content and then you restate it in your own words, then there's the chance that you will have a much better opportunity to absorb and understand it. So again, I was underlining as a student for years, even though I really wasn't certain what the absolutely important material was. But now that I know what I know about learning science, if I were underlying content and I really wanted to absorb it, the next thing I do is find to restate it in my own words, because that would really promote my absorption of the knowledge. So going on to specifically online courses. Now, before the pandemic, Luke and I worked with select faculty who had chosen to work in an online environment. But then, of course, the pandemic hit, and suddenly the entire world, including the K through 12, the primary school age, became online educators. So our work became incredibly important. So how are some of the ways in which designers like us work with faculty to improve their online courses? Well, one thing we do is we apply what is called UDL, which is Universal Design for Learning, because students learn differently. And when they're presented with one uniform model of learning, that may work well for some students, but not well for others. A UDL design course will be mindful of this and give students a variety of options in an online space to master the content and material. The other thing we might do is draw upon the research which says that learning works really well when you contextualize the content. You may start with a concept in an abstract form, but if you really want people to absorb it, you have to give them, you have to apply the concept in a concept, and you have to give them concrete examples. So moving between the abstract and the concrete and the contextualize is incredibly important. I think many of us know that, but we often forget that, and we linger a bit too long in the world of abstraction. And the other thing we help do is promote metacognition. We get students to think about their thinking. In other words, if they solve the problem in a certain way, we ask them to step back and say, don't focus on the content. Focus on how you approach the problem. Why did you approach the problem in that way? How did that approach enable you to master the content? And this is often the case when you're doing any activity around simulation, which is becoming an increasingly important method of education and higher education, which which Luke will speak to a bit later in the presentation. The other thing we emphasize is that one of the things that we can help students with is give them a sense of agency in their learning. In all of our formal educational experiences, we're often in a passive mode in a classroom where we're sitting and listening. And to the degree that we often do that, that can feel very disempowering. And so we shouldn't be surprised that when students go through that process and they arrive at adulthood and they don't know how to make decisions, it's because their formative experience has been in a passive information receiving mode. So one of the things we emphasize is that whenever possible, learning experiences should be designed to give students meaningful choices so that they feel in charge and they feel autonomous. And that will increase their motivation. So let me give you an example of where a specific theory can be applied. So there's a theory in learning called situated cognition. And it goes back to the point that I said earlier about that learning occurs best within highly contextualized situations. Okay, well, that's the theory. So how do you actually apply it? Well, in application, that means there's a lot more modeling where an instructor is showing students specifically how to apply knowledge. This is very common practice in engineering or in applied health sciences. One-to-one coaching with a student. Scaffolding, which is understanding what the students already know and then building on that foundation, because if we introduce students to higher level knowledge without accurately assessing whether they have the lower level knowledge, the higher level knowledge will not be absorbed. Much like a building, you have to build the first floor and then the second floor. Give them opportunities to articulate what they learn or what they think they've learned, and to explore on their own. Sometimes the best thing to do is to take away some of the structure in the learning experience and simply give an opportunity for students to make decisions and explore situations on their own. For example, when you tell students to go off to a library and just go select a book on a topic on their own without you specifically telling them what book to read, or go to a website. You're giving them an opportunity to look around and make decisions. So that's the overview of the basic background of our field. And now I'm going to stop my screen share and let Luke take over from him. So let me see
Awesome.
if you can, let me see. So go here, and do you have it now, Luke? Can you do the screen share?
Yeah, as long as you guys can see everything okay.
Yep, it's coming up. It's coming up.
Awesome. So everything was good to go?
We're good to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Pete. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time today to listen to us basically nerd out about everything that comes with learning. For my portion of the presentation, I want to dive much more into how we, as learning designers and instructional designers, actually work with faculty. And then I want to show you a couple of different examples of how I have used these very same strategies I'm going to be talking about, and give you some real world different types of examples of how they've been used across a variety of different programs. So where I first want to start talking about just instructional designers and learning designers in particular is that even though we have a certain set of skills, really at the core of everything that we do, that we absolutely do best, is working with faculty. We need to have this relationship with those who teach the content, because as Pete was alluding to earlier, talking about how for faculty, you are the subject matter expert. You are the one who knows the most about the content, about the topic. You've studied it for years and have real world application. And then we come into play because we really understand how students learn. And then together, when we are able to partner up and to form this relationship, that is when the very best type of an online learning experience is going to be possible. So at the very beginning, when I first started working with a faculty member, this is actually what I first talk about. Because for many a times, as soon as you start working with someone who really doesn't know online learning that well, they're kind of like, so where do we begin? And this is where I start talking about something that is called backwards design. And what backwards design is talking about is that in order to design a course, or in order for us to transform a face-to-face course into an online version, we really need to think about the end game. Where are students trying to go? What real tangible skills are they going to be developing? And that is what we call learning outcomes. So what I always pose when I first start talking about backwards design is, what do you want the students to learn? And then how are we going to know if students are actually learning and going through the motions? And then what will you and the students need to do in order for this learning process to happen? So where this begins is that we start talking about the tangible skills, the outcomes at the end of the day. And then from here, we move on over into an assessment period. Exactly how can we assess student knowledge based upon working towards these real types of outcomes? And then from there, we move down into learning activities. Just what exactly are we going to be building and asking students to do to make sure that we can assess the knowledge that will then lead into the outcomes? And then finally, we wrap that up with the content, because for many people, when they think of learning online, they think about readings, they think about online discussions, and they think about videos. And even though those are components of online learning, that's really not all there is to it. And that's where you can see where it's all the way down at the bottom of this design. So where I want to talk more about this is to break away from the passive learning idea of only just that there is a reading, that there is a video. There is much more that we can do that involves the students, because that is when they're going to learn the very best online, is engaging them. And to that end, over here at MIT, we have a saying which is called mens et manus, or basically what means mind in hand. And this is saying that you must involve the student in the learning process, or else you're not going to be able to retain any of this new knowledge or information. And then, of course, they're wondering at the end of the day, how can I use this? And really, what's in it for me if I take this type of course? So following this belief, we've developed our own form of online pedagogy that we have used now for a number of years. And this talks about a couple of different ways of how we design the courses. The first one is talking about exploring. And this is what you think about for research-based readings and videos. But then we move over into practicing. We want students to be able to practice in a safe space on something that is not graded. That's just going to be a type of a quick hitting win in order for them just to try to reinforce this new knowledge that they're learning about. So you can think of the multiple choice questions, a couple of scenarios, and a few things of that nature. Then we talk about applying. Exactly how are you going to be applying this skill? And when it comes to that, then we're going to do different forms of grade assignments that involves case studies and problems, scenario-based questions, and just real-world applications of a skill. And we talk about sharing as well, too, because, of course, connectivism is such an important part of learning. You don't just learn on your own. You learn with colleagues and peers and teachers. So being able to connect with others, share your experience, and just being able to participate in one another from forums to polls and other different ways of communication. And then finally comes assessing. Being able to evaluate your own knowledge is a critical part of learning. And we can take them through different items, such as with graded assessments to pre and post assessments, peer-reviewed activities, and a few different things of this way. So when we take that type of online pedagogy, this is how we have actually mapped out the activities inside of the courses before. And this is actually taken from one of the courses that we worked on over at MIT. And what this is showing you is that we can break down exactly and link and map up the activity to a different part of the learning science and just what exactly the student is going to be going through. And once again, the Mens at Manus belief is that we really want them to be much more active in learning. So that's what you can see, that the exploring part, the readings and the videos, that's only 30% of what they're actually going through. They are going into way more things as far as for practicing, applying, sharing, and assessing. And as you can see up at the top too, we actually even link it over into the minutes and really just give the faculty members just this type of insight of really what is your student about to be going through for the next couple of weeks all throughout your course. So one of the different forms of learning strategies that I absolutely love to use with faculty members and to coach them on is something that is called scenario-based learning. And what scenario-based learning is that this is when you take a hypothetical or a real-life scenario, but is based on an authentic issue. What is a student going to be encountering in the real world that we can prepare them for? And what this does is that it creates an interest. Because you are establishing this real-world connection, what's going to happen is that when the student faces this problem in the real world, they are far more likely to retain that knowledge and the information that they learned about. And it's going to just overall increase the likelihood that they're going to be able to remember your scenario-based problem, think about how they solved it, and then they can use that over into whatever situation they might be facing. Scenario-based learning also develops real tangible skills. There is no guesswork when it comes to this. You can actually link and see what they're going to be going through and how they're going to use this skill. The benefit of this too is that you can use this in a variety of different ways when it comes to time. Whether you need just a quick hitting concept, if you're trying to follow up with something that may be more abstract in theory, and then the scenario talks about the concrete skills, or let's say you want to do it in a more project-based fashion, where this is going to be like a 16-week different type of project, and you want someone to go through a real life longer scenario, which is of course absolutely possible. And then finally, last but certainly not least, is that scenarios allow these students to practice in a real and safe space. If you're going to be asking a student, let's say, to go into an organization, and maybe they're a organizational leadership student, and you want them to go and fix a company's culture, you are certainly going to want them to practice a couple of different strategies in your course before they go out into the real world and try to apply this skill set. So let me give you a couple of different examples of how we have used this over here at MIT. One of them was actually talking about a course on strategic redesign. And then the outcome of this scenario for this course was that we want to be able to have the students identify the notion of capability and its impact with implementing change. So that came from the professor. So then I worked with him to say, okay, what type of real world scenario does actually link up to this type of outcome when it talks about strategies and organizations? And we came up with the idea about how organizations absolutely struggle with being able to implement a new idea because they want results quickly, but they don't give it enough time to actually grow and see results properly. So what we did from here is that we had his video explaining about the capability trap. So here he is talking about the theory. And then from this theory video, we then put in this type of scenario-based practice problem. Now this prompt came up. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's a ton of font. But what this essentially is saying is that we're asking the students to imagine themselves working for a manufacturer and then all of a sudden facing this problem where HR is reaching out to them saying that they need to use a new project management software in the future. And because they are going to be a leader within this company, it is their job to train future employees on how to use this type of software. But of course, as we know about in the real world, they're not given enough time, training, or education on how to use the software. So then from there, I crafted up an email that essentially came from HR, and I'm using quotes here with my fingers because I came from a mock-up background, if you will, of this type of an email that's basically saying the exact same thing over to them, which I made in Photoshop, but of course—
Now we can speak whatever we want.
Oh, can you guys still hear me okay?
I can hear you, Luke.
Okay, sorry. I just heard something. I was like, oh, so I'll make sure you can still hear me. So from here, from that different type of Photoshop file, that then went into two different types of questions asking for students, with one of them being able to identify a type of the capability trap within their own organization, and then knowing what they know now, how they solve that problem, how would you then approach this into the real world? So that's one example of it. Another one we can see from a course that talks about critical thinking. The outcome of this one is being able to identify types of evidence for or against alternative solutions. And working with the faculty member, we were trying to think about real world scenarios that a leader might have to face. And because of everything with COVID-19 and remote working and just trying to follow safety protocols, it very well made for a type of a detailed scenario that we could use. Once again, not going to read you all of his fonts, but what this essentially is saying is that the student was put into a position where they're going to become a leader in this organization, and they're actually going to be the ones who needs to figure out when people should be returning back to work in a safe manner. And is it actually safe? Should they wait it out? Should they just make everyone go remote for a longer period of time? And we had learners actually debate with one another, trying to figure out what's really the best way in order to do this. So we asked them the question of which side of the argument do you think is right and why, and then to provide evidence that support the claims and explain how they came to this different type of conclusion. And as you can imagine, many students had many different answers on what is deemed as safe, what is not, especially over here in the United States. This has become a very large obstacle that the country is currently facing of trying to figure out what to do and when. So many people had different thoughts, and sharing all of these types of comments and conversations were certainly an easy thing to do. A next different type of application you can use are simulations. We've done a couple of different varieties. One of them I want to show you is actually in a course that talked about how to lead a change within an organization. The outcome of this one was to describe the fundamentals of a network and really just how to use the network effectively. So in this simulation, we worked with Harvard to be able to partner with them and to use their software simulation they have developed. And in this type of a simulation, the scenario was that a student has to lead a change by using their influence, their persuasion within their network. Now, what this ended up becoming was like a massive game for students where they can see themselves inside of an organizational chart over on the right-hand side in one of the teal boxes. And then from there, we gave them a certain level of power and influence throughout the company. And they had to figure out over a period of time how to make more people adopt the ideas all throughout the organization. And this is really cool to see, because in the real world, the exact same thing. As you're building relationships, as you're trying to move things throughout the company, there are certainly some possibilities where some people are going to listen to you and others are actually going to resist you completely and probably not trust you if you keep on talking about different ideas that are not going to be working in the future. So you can see from the org chart who's adopting the idea and who's starting to resist the change you're talking about. And then we ask students to be able to think about different action items and what exactly they would do in order to lead this change. Are they going to send an email? Are they going to host a town hall meeting? Are they going to have like a Zoom call like this? What are they really going to do in order to try to bring awareness into this different type of solution? And then from here, we can actually show and map out the level of impact as far as for how many people are buying into the idea, and were you actually able to lead a change within the given time frame from everyone within the organization. And what was really cool about this is that all the students approach the simulation in a different way. So what we did is that we made this not only a simulation, but then we mapped this into an assignment that we are calling a peer-reviewed assignment. So the instructor actually isn't grading this one. This is students grading other students to be able to look at the each other's work and say like, oh, that's what you did. That's the strategy that you took in order to try to be able to lead this change. So we asked them to write an essay and talk about it. What worked? What didn't work? Were there any common mistakes that you figured out along the way? And really just how did you diagnose and strategize everything as far as for every additional step? And then following this too, we made it become a discussion, and we just opened up this type of a discussion forum for everybody, just talking about reflecting upon everything that they learned. Because as we know of a learning process, we start from the very beginning of applying prior knowledge and working our way up the ladder of being able to remember, to understand, to analyze, and to apply, and to eventually be able to reflect back and to close this type of a learning loop and start it back up again. So reflection is a key component to learning. And of course, being able to connect with other students and share their reflections with them, where it is so beneficial for everyone to learn from one another and talk about what they thought worked out well and maybe what they could have done differently inside of a simulation. And then last but certainly not least, I want to talk to you folks about polls too, which are kind of an easy thing to implement inside of courses, depending upon what system you are using. The poll feature might already be inside of the LMS, but there are a couple of different softwares out there that are free polls, and you can even use like Google Forms if you wish to do so. And same thing for this one is that what we had was a video talking about a certain type of change within an organization, and then we were asking students to vote, essentially vote on answers asynchronously, and you could actually see who they thought should be in these different types of positions, and they could all see each other's results too, which was the coolest part. So then more discussions could come up as students were voting throughout this course, and then it made for a much more robust conversation at the end, just talking about your thoughts, why you voted the way that you did, and what do you think is going to be happening next. So those are just a couple of different strategies that I've used, all within normal bounds, nothing too extreme, but certainly it all comes back to that relationship with learning designers and faculty members. And then together, that is when all these cool ideas and activities can really come to life and to make the online learning experience more meaningful. And that's all we got, folks. Thank you so much.
Okay, if anybody let's see, wants to put questions in the chat, that'd be great. We'd be happy to tackle those. I also, I'll pull up at the end. There's a resource page for that I use in my Harvard class. It's a Google Doc. It basically is a list of every useful resource that I can think of that I recommend to people. So that link will be in the document, and of course we'll share it out with you, so you can continue on exploring these topics on your own. But let's first go to the chat section, because this is the part for us that's really fun, because we can stop talking and hearing what we already know, and we can learn where you can hear from our colleagues. So by all means, just jump into the chat and feel free to contribute.
Hi, Peter and Luke. It was very interesting to listen to both of you. I'm Asha from St. Paul's College. Actually, I have a doubt regarding the pace at which different learners learn would be different, no, in online mode, especially when you offer courses to people from different countries across the globe. The pace of learning would be different. So or how do you plan for accommodating them in the learning process? Because some of them may be able to understand much faster than or no that structuring. How do you accommodate for that difference in the learning pace when it is in online mode?
I have an answer, but Luke, did you want to take it first, and then I'll jump in with me, or do you want me to go first?
It does. I can definitely jump in. Asha,
right.
very, very nice to meet you as well. One of the strategies that I try to use for all my courses is that I try to do more of a self-paced model. And that has been extremely helpful because, as you have said, is that you're going to have some students who they just know the content and they're able to just, dedicate more time and are able to do far more. So because of that, they're moving at a faster pace. And then other times you have students who they struggle with these concepts early on, and they just need their more time working with resources to be able to figure out just exactly what are the next steps in order to progress throughout the course. So having a type of a self-paced model where I don't gate the content, I try to open up as much as I can early on within reason that will allow a student to be able to go really at their own at their own pace, at their own time. And this is definitely a good thing too for also mentioning using pre-assessments at the beginning of courses, because just like how we had a pre-assessment for this presentation, we wanted to be able to know more about you and be able to speak to something that was going to be helpful for you. I try to put pre-assessments in all my courses at the beginning, a couple of weeks away, and just to be able to see exactly, should I be changing up my course content? Do I know ahead of time that some learners are going to need a lot more help than others? If so, how can I plan for that? So those would be my two answers. Pete, go ahead.
Yes. I go building on what Luke said. One of the things we've realized over the past couple of years in learning design is that we have this traditional course structure which we all use, and we apply it to everything. And we do that because it's bureaucratically efficient. Okay. But it's not really maximized for learning. And one of my favorite sayings about education is that for all we talk about the importance of learning, we do what's bureaucratically efficient but pedagogically inefficient. It's not really built with the knowledge of human learners and how they actually learn. For example, we in traditional classes, we just put in students together based upon their age, not based upon how much they know or where they are. When you step back, you realize that doesn't make much sense. You should really bring in students based upon their knowledge levels. But to Luke's point, there's been much more exploration with modular-based courses where people aren't required to move ahead at the same pace. The course says, okay, here's the content, here are the competencies that you have to master. There's a general period. If you're really advanced and you can move through it quickly, by all means move through it, complete it, and then go on to the next one. In fact, some colleges are building the design entirely around that because they say, listen, if you can get this content mastered in 6 months rather than 9 months, we're not going to force you to do 9 months. And when they do that, they get more students because the students will choose, like in any market approach, where the design is responsive to their needs. So that's one really important thing is to build out modules. You can build in some shared experiences for all students, but really, modular-based approach is really going to be more responsive to the students and less frustrating. Because again, when you look at what causes students, if all human beings love to learn, what causes students to avoid school? It's the structure, the way we've designed it. We have built these machines to ingeniously destroy the love of learning because we're going through these joyless. Give them an opportunity to make choices about the pace at which they're going. Yes. Treat them as adults in training, and then let them move through it. So that's certainly one approach. And the other thing I think that I have tremendous hope for is the evolving technologies around artificial intelligence for virtual tutors. Because people will say, well, I have modular learning, but I need to spend all this time with my students, and I can't do that if they're all moving at a different pace. I said, you're right. We're never going to get that one-to-one point, but we are going to get to a point where we design tools which interact with students and give them the feedback they need much more quickly. And
Yeah.
some actually schools are already doing this.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thank you both.
So,
Of course.
all right.
Hi, sir. Thank you. So myself, Tiago from St. Elizabeth, Kerala. So the both the presentations were so amazing. So I have a queries related to the scenario-based learning. So when you talk about the scenario-based learning, you're focusing the learning aspect. What about the context of the teacher side? So whether we are taking the teaching side or the learning side while you're delivering the lecture. The next thing, in the scenario-based learning, you are giving some example. In what way that it will be good for the mathematics teaching, particularly how we can use the scenario-based teaching for teaching complex analysis as well as the real analysis. In what context it may be useful in the base of mathematics teaching. So kindly give us your answer. Thank you, sir.
Did you want to talk? Luke, go ahead.
Matt, I actually had kind of difficulties hearing that. The microphone was kind of breaking up. If you heard it more, Peter, go ahead and answer.
No, I was actually, I apologize. I was responding to something in the chat while we were talking, so I was kind of switching to my teaching assistant mode. So, well, I apologize. Could you repeat the question just one more time?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I'm audible to all of you, no? I think so. Okay, the question. So when you're talking about the scenario-based learning, as a teacher, whether we are looking toward the learning side or the teaching side, because as a teacher, we are much focused on the teaching side only. We are not much focusing on the student's points of view. That is why in what manner we have to connect with the real world example while you're teaching a mathematics particularly while teaching complex analysis and real analysis, how we can use the scenario-based learning or a teaching approach, in what manner it will be useful for the students.
What are the contexts in which scenario-based learning can be applied? I think, is that a correct, am I rephrasing your question correctly, or have I missed any important detail? Okay, I'm going to assume that when I talk about scenario-based learning to a group of instructors, some will say, well, this is all very well and good for some subjects, but it's not really good for other subjects. In other words, scenario-based learning is really is like in the applied health sciences. If you're training someone to be a health professional, well, obviously giving them scenarios is a good idea. Or if you're training people to for business studies, scenario is good. But there are others that is not good for. My first career in education was as a writing teacher. And I've been using simulations in writing courses for almost 20 years now. And that was partly because early in my career as a designer, I worked during the day in a medical college, and at night teaching college students how to write. And my medical college career was next to a simulation lab, which was very, very, very popular with the medical students. And I just couldn't help think, how come my writing students don't have an equally interesting learning tool to use? So I created a series of what I called rhetorical simulations, where students, rather than writing an essay, they were given a prompt, and then they had to respond to a series of prearranged possible opening choices. And once they selected it, it automatically took them to a second series of paragraphs. And so they assembled the text simply based upon selections. And I said to them, look, you haven't used any energy to actually generate the text. You just focused on making decisions. So this is a metacognitive moment. Why did you choose those selections as opposed to other ones? What was your rationale? So that was a situation where I was able to apply a simulation-based learning. Now, you mentioned mathematics, and I think if I understand correctly, you're wondering, well, how do you simulate, how do you do scenario-based learning in mathematics? Well, again, my first impulse would be to find a contextualized situation where people are using applied mathematics, and then having students to go to work on that. I personally think that my mathematical education would have gone much further if I had been using the mathematics in an applied environment rather than a purely abstract one. But Luke, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, because what I was thinking about too was that, especially for mathematics, because I am someone who struggles with math. I always have been. The way I taught math, I really feel like was not The greatest. I could have learned in a couple of different ways. And I'm thinking about if I was now a math teacher teaching about scenario-based learning and how would I analyze those different types of responses. I feel like the first thing I would do would be to talk about things that, like over here, that we have talked about for like accounting courses, talking about taxes and balancing checkbooks and paying different fees and things of that nature. Having those different types of real-world applications as far as for how am I going to use this once I do graduate would have really helped me to understand the importance of mathematics in the real world. And then we can analyze those different types of results too by not just did you get the right answer or not, which is always a big thing with math. It's either black or white, but also being able to look through as far as for their reasoning and their explanation behind how they actually get to that answer. And what are they really thinking about critically as they do solve those different types of problems. So hopefully I answered that correctly. I'm sorry, the microphone was breaking up and I have awful hearing. So I think that's what you're asking about.
Thanks for the book. Thank you. Thank you. It's nice.
Of course.
Yes. One of the questions, and I have them all, and I'll try, if we can't get them all today, I'll try to respond to them by email. But one of them is, how do we keep their attention with social media? And we often complain about social media, but that's one area of learning design, which is what are we doing or not doing that's failing to capture their attention? I mean, the best instructors that I've known are always where their first job was to capture their students' attention, and that they simply couldn't assume that they was going to come to them automatically. Probably because many of the brightest instructors themselves were very restless students, and they had trouble paying attention in a conventional course. So they understand the importance of spending the first few minutes finding some way to capture attention. One way is to get students to do something. If we start courses with us talking and them sitting and listening, that's always challenging. One thing is that with the minute they begin a formal learning experience, they're doing something. It's possible that we could do the talking at the end rather than the beginning, because the conventional design favors when a course begins, we begin to speak. Why does it have to be? Why are we speaking? Why don't they walk in immediately and start doing something, and then in the flow. One of the most successful college instructors I'm aware of is a gentleman, Luke might remember his name. He teaches computer science at both Harvard and Yale, and all his lectures are recorded. When students are in a space together, they're working on projects. They're working, and they're in teams. Because he wants them doing things as quickly as possible, running into problems and solving them as a team. When it comes to the information sharing part, he feels it's much more efficient to record that, so that students can go back over and over and over again to listen to what he has to say. And even when he does the recorded lectures, he tries to make them as engaging as possible. And going back to research, he divides them into small sections, because he realizes one long recorded lecture, people are going to drop off about 6 or 7 minutes in. The research shows that. So he'll divide it into subtopics. So what they can do is, with lectures, is you can divide them into subtopics, so that the students is looking at a 5-minute video on this aspect, a 5-minute video on that. So cumulatively, it could be 40 minutes worth of a talk on a topic, but it's broken down. So the students, you don't have time to lose the student's attention, but the information is still being conveyed. So there are ways to go around, and that's one of the things I like about online learning, is that in an online learning environment, you can capture data on when students are doing things and when they're not. And I remember a couple of years ago, I think it was the Harvard Business School, their data scientists pulled up a heat map of student activity in their learning management system. And they noticed that an unusual number of students were getting into the system the evening before a test. It's like they were very quiet, and all of a sudden, the evening before a test, they're going in, they're cramming. And I said, okay, we get this. And so the instructor can go back to the students and say, FYI, I noticed that a lot of you get really active, just before you have to do a test. That's really not a good strategy. If you really want to learn the content, this is how you do it. So one of the great things about a well-designed online environment is the learning analytics side of it. We can get data on actual student behavior, which can then inform our instructional decisions. So.
The only thing I'll add to that, Pete, too, you answered it very well. The only thing I'll say that I've had success with doing is that we try to meet the students where they are too.
Yes.
So if they're using social media, then I need to figure out how to get on social media to teach them with it. And that is definitely very challenging. It is not easy to do depending upon what they're using and what they like. But for instance, we have a number of students who use Slack. And I was a designer at Northeastern. So because they were using Slack, we decided to incorporate our discussion boards into Slack instead of having it within the LMS itself. And same thing can be said too, if you're going to be using something where, like, let's say everyone's using LinkedIn, well, then we'll make our online groups and discussions onto the LinkedIn forums. Like we can be able to adapt and to meet them where they are in that sense. So that way it's not constantly changing their behaviors, which is what we keep on asking them to do, is to try to form more back into my way, when really they already have their own way of talking. So I want to try to be able to captivate their attention over there. So that was just Pete had a great answer for that, but that was just the one extra thing I wanted to say to that one.
And the other thing too is, and this has been my pet annoyance for years, is that we don't do enough on mobile learning for their phones. So many students these days have mobile phones. And that's great a space to design tools for students in their downtime, when they're out and about, when they're on public transportation, when they have free time. And we don't have enough content that runs easily on mobile phones. So a couple of years ago, I began designing some content using entirely free tools to design good content for mobile phones to direct students to, so that when they had the moment, they could pull it up and practice some concepts. And again, it didn't cost me anything except time and my own expertise. And that was a very enjoyable project. But again, one of the areas where higher education has really not paid sufficient attention to is mobile learning, because our mindset is so much around traditional formal course structures.
Pete, do you want to do like a rapid fire of answering the questions in the chat? Because I see we only have 6 minutes left and we have like at least 10 questions.
I know. I'm gonna, let's say,
talk too much.
Okay, I'll read we'll alternate. I'll read a question and you answer. You read a question and I'll answer, and we'll do our very, very best.
Go for it.
So okay. So
I think Vidya has first question.
Vidya, how to create learning environments, and how can we make balance between learning and ability for students and decide to complete curriculum part, including evaluation process? Go.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very long answer. That's not, of course, it's not a quick answer to that type of a statement. So what I would say is that first and foremost, I have all the empathy in the world for a faculty member trying to figure out how to do this on their own. And really what I would say to do that for the very first step is to try to not do it by yourself, and to be able to go and reach out and find resources and find other people who are willing to lend a hand and to give you a second glance of your course. Because what you're trying to do, if you're trying to do this by yourself, is that essentially you're doing the role of someone like me as a designer, and then your own role of teaching, and then trying to, of course, be like part IT, because you're trying to make sure that nothing's broken and everything is working. So it's an extremely tough thing to do as far as trying to find this balance. And then what I would say is that over time, over multiple runs of the course, over hearing from student feedback every single term, you're going to learn what's actually effective in the learning process. You can do student evaluations and interviews and ask them what went well, what they want more of within the online course, and to build more around that positive student feedback, because of course the learners are the ones who went through the course. They're going to give you the best answers instead of you trying to make assumptions and to guess as far as for, is this working, or maybe I should go to a different path. And that's the best I can answer it within the time we have left. So Pete, next question for you. Does higher education emphasize more on problem-based learning, experimental learning over there?
It is certainly increased, although it is not as nearly as widely used as I think either Luke and I would like. There is very promising moving towards PBL, or problem-based learning. And we're seeing greater adoption. It's not universal by any means, but it's increasingly popular for the very reasons about the adult learning principles that we enunciated earlier, that adult learners from 16, 17 on like to solve problems which relate to what they're going to encounter in the real world. That really increases their motivation. So It's getting better. It could be much better, but we are seeing positive signs. Okay, I got the easy question.
Yeah, I'm well aware.
Yeah, I know. I'm just looking now for the complex questions and give them to you. Okay, next question. What would be the best practice of retaining existing course content to migrate to an online-based system?
So there are two different answers to that to come to mind. The first is that when I am designing online courses, the first thing that I do is I go into Google Drive and I make separate folders. And I upload my videos and links onto there, along with my course documents, the rubrics, and everything else that usually lives inside of there. And once you actually build it onto the course itself and it's done, any type of learning management system that you are using will allow you to export the entire course content as a file and allow you to just download this massive file. And then from there, you can upload that one to the next course, the next one, and the next one, and keep on using that. That is the easiest way to migrate content once you have actually built it. But that's, of course, saying you need to build it all and do it first for that type of tedious process. Got anything to add to that?
No, actually, I've been just reviewing some of the questions, and they're all about scenario-based learning. I would say,
great.
So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to compress some of the final questions. What can we do around scenario-based learning in this period? I would say a great deal. There's an enormous amount of free tools, and the approaches to it. There's a lot of training around scenario-based learning. Both Luke and I use it extensively. I'd happy at some future point to talk to you again about scenario-based learning, but I definitely think it's a very powerful tool for helping students absorb knowledge. And the other thing that came up is retaining. A big topic is retrieval practice, because one of the things we see around the world is even when students get a really good grade in the course, within 6 months, if they're not applying the knowledge, there's a significant knowledge decay. And we've just gotten kind of used to this. And this is awful because all that knowledge gets lost. So there's more and more work around retrieval practice. What can we do to help people retain the knowledge they have acquired in their formal learning experiences? That's one, in my area of research, that's one of the more fascinating works. And there is actually a learning scientist here in Boston. I'll try to remember her name, who just done significant work around that. But yeah, there's a lot of work about not just learning, but how do we enable people to retain the information better after they leave if they're not applying it immediately. So there's a lot of potential there as well.
The other thing I'll add to that one too quickly is that for scenario-based learning, there really isn't just one right way to do it. I have done scenario-based learning from a video delivery method like this, where I'm actually acting as, say, the client or the student's future manager or something along those lines to make it feel more real, more authentic. I've also made podcasts for it. I've written the memos. I've sent them emails. There's a ton of different ways to do it. What you're really just looking for, whatever you choose to do, and even if you're just talking about it in a course like this and just posing this real world question to them, you just want to be able for them to clearly see and connect the dots to figure out how, by answering this question, am I going to face this scenario in the future? And when and where and how is this going to happen to me? Because it will, chances are, depending upon your subject matter and what you're talking about. And we can also have them try to think back to past experiences. Maybe they already have experiences before in the past. Maybe it's something they're dealing with right now. Let's say we're not talking about a job. Maybe we're actually trying to relate it just to their academic career. Or maybe if it's something talking about more for the future. You can pose any of those different types of scenarios, or even have another friend or colleague come in and kind of write and help you develop content with you. Or just once again, ask students about, like, hey, we're talking about this accounting course. Have you ever had to use accounting before? And then they can give you an answer of some kind. And you're like, okay, now I know how to build some more details around your experience with math and with numbers. And maybe I can craft something that's going to make a lot more sense to you. So I know we've already gone over time.
Yeah,
but
we're a minute over, so
darn.
So
that's a short answer.
Yeah. So we hope it was worth your time. I know this came at the end of a long work day for you. So we want to let you know that we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. I had a last slide that basically said, let's see if I can. It basically says thank you to all of you, and also a link to a Google Doc that I created with a whole bunch of resources, which I'm sure you can dive into and the content there would keep most people busy for quite a number of years. So again, thank you so much for taking the time with us, and I hope you have a very good day. And that's
Yeah,
pretty
thank
much
you
it.
all. Thank you for listening to two folks nerd out and talk about learning for an hour and change. That's
Yeah.
it's no small feat. So thank you very much for listening to us chat.
Thank you very much, Peter and Dr. Luke. I believe that it's a great session, and you have a lot of questions also on today, and you try to limit everything in the concerned time itself. I'm really thankful for that. Before thanking our resource person, I would like to thank each and every people who have joined with us, especially the faculty members. And I have our beloved one of the great professors that we have met from the educational sector itself, Professor Tiago Surya. He's a Central University professor over here in Kerala, and who is mentored to a lot of people like me. And he have also joined with us, and he had asked a question also in between. And I'm really proud that we have Professor Tiago sir and a lot of other faculty members with us for this program, especially from the educational sector itself, I mean educational area itself. And moving further, I would like to extend my sincere thanks, sincere gratitude towards all the participants who have joined with us. On behalf of St. Albert's College Autonomous, as well as my office, I extend my sincere thanks. Thank you very much, all the participants. And moving to my responsibility to thank the key persons of today, Peter Shea and Dr. Luke Antony. It is a great pleasure for us to have such eminent personalities with us and sharing the concept of learning design for higher education with the faculty members, as well as the people who have the passion towards the teaching. So on behalf of the St. Albert's College Autonomous and on behalf of my office and all the participants over here for whom you have shared your experience, as well as a lot of inputs, like even I was actually going through the links, and it will take a lot of years to complete these links.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how we have to be rich enough to share the resources with the people. So that's a peculiarity of the educational sector itself. So on behalf of everyone, I extend our sincere thanks to Peter Shea and Dr. Luke Antony. And I believe that this is beginning of our long relationship. That's what I believe in. And we will try to collaborate in the way, and we will explore how we can we will sit together and we'll plan further what can be done with regard to the educational aspects, maybe a minor or specific research level activities or something can be figured out, and we could do in the coming days. So once again, thank you very much for joining with us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.